Hey BookTube! Welcome fellow mages to the last of my end of year top 10 countdown style lists. And this one is arguably the best one because this is the list of the top 10 books that I read in the year of 2019. I am very excited. So I have ranked these so that the last book that I talk about will be like my best book of the year, so these are going in ascending order. Oh, I will also say that I am limiting this to like one book per series, so if any of these books are like part of a series, I'm just going to choose like the best one that I've read out of that series. Otherwise I might have like 2, 3, 4 books all from the same series all on this list, and I don't want that. And yeah, so let's talk about my favourite books. So 10th spot on my list was kind of really hard to pick. I was really torn by either The Binding by Bridget Collins or The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. But then I just started reading my last book of the year and it really needs to be on this list. And that is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. So the only reason that this is in 10th place is because, as you can see, I haven't actually finished reading it yet. But because of my schedule and the fact that I go back to work like right after the start of New Year, I kind of can't wait to do this video. So I'm tentatively putting it at 10th place, not because I think it's worse than like other books on this list. It does have the potential to be like way up further in this list. However, because I haven't finished it, I don't feel like I can put it any higher just for like fairness sake. So this book follows a thief and his like gang of thieves. I can't really say much more about this because like I'm not very far in. However, they are about to like, or they are in the midst of trying to pull off this like really big heist, and so far just seeing all the machinations that went into it is really interesting and I'm really enjoying this so far. So yeah, I just really wanted to give this like an honourable mention and at least put it somewhere on this list. Okay, favourite book number 9 is Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo, and also just like look at this cover. So this is the second book in the Six of Crows duology, although Leigh has sort of like rumoured that she might eventually one day write a third book in the series, but for now this is sort of like the finale. So the first book follows a band of like 6 dangerous outcasts trying to pull off this huge like magical heist. Essentially in this world there are like different types of mages called Grisha, and we learn in the Six of Crows that there has been a drug manufactured that can seriously boost their power, but that makes them sort of really kind of crazy, powerful and weird. This could completely change the tide in things like war and warfare, and so the Crows have been hired to smuggle out the man who invented this drug, who is being held in like the world's most impenetrable prison, and that's kind of the setup for book 1. So I really liked book 1. I gave it about 4 stars, but I think I rated this like a 4.25 or something, just slightly higher than the first book. And that's because while I preferred like the heist setup of the first book, these books are like all about character. They are very character driven, and like the best part of them is like the individual characters within the story, and I feel like we got so much more of them in this because obviously this is like the continuation and the climax of like all of their stories and relationships and everything that's going on between them. So I just found myself really enjoying this one. It was just really entertaining and fun. It is a YA fantasy, and I think it's the only YA on this list, but just for like sheer entertainment value and the fact that I just really enjoyed this one, it's found its way onto my best books of the year. Okay, the 8th place spot on my list is another adult fantasy, and this one again is just pure sheer just like enjoyment factor, entertainment factor, and that is Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. So this book appeals to me on a very special level in that it follows a band of like older washed up mercenaries like well past their like glory days, finally getting like their band back together and coming out of retirement because the leader of the band's daughter has found herself trapped in a city under siege. So they're gonna get the boys back together, get back on the road and go and save this guy's daughter, and that's the setup for the book. And if I don't just love a story about like sad old men, that is what the book promised, and that is exactly what it gave me, and so much more. This is another really character driven story, and I just adored every character in this book. They are so funny and just so relatable and just sort of like cranky and old and like humorous, and the banter in this book is fantastic. I loved the banter so much. If you're a fan of games like Dragon Age and Mass Effect where your party has banter, this has that. Sort of like world in here is also very reminiscent of things like D&D. It really does feel like everyone's got like their little character together like to perform a campaign, like your little D&D group of like characters. And the unique thing about this world is that there are loads of mercenary bands. There are so many, and they're kind of lauded in the same way that musicians and like bands of musicians and singers are in our world, in that they are all famous. Most of them like tour, they play arenas, and by that I mean they slaughter like dangerous creatures in arenas of thousands of spectators. And it's just a whole lot of fun. It's also just one of the most accessible fantasies I've come across. I think I said this in my review, in my wrap-up, but like I feel like this is great for people that are really familiar with the fantasy genre and like all the tropes, because it plays on those tropes a lot, but also for people that are just getting into fantasy, because it doesn't expect you to have any sort of like prior knowledge of the genre or any understanding of like the way things work, because it plays on all those tropes. So it's just really easygoing and accessible, and I love this story. And I think the third book in this series is potentially coming out maybe in 2020, not entirely sure, but I have my fingers crossed. Book number 7, and definitely one that I knew once I'd read it would probably be on this list, and that is The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. So this is the first book in Joe Abercrombie's first lore universe. I am not sure how to describe the plot of this book, because even having read it, I can't really explain the core like plot of this book, but all you really need to know is that it kind of follows a bunch of different characters, different POV characters, and the sort of like overarching thing happening in the background is that this supposedly very powerful mage type character is supposedly coming back to like reclaim his seat on this sort of like council thing, but that is just such a small part of the plot and mainly focuses on sort of like the daily lives and struggles and like the journeys of like these three main characters, and I think after a certain point there's a fourth character added, and I just can't explain the plot. I don't know what the plot is. I read it and I don't know what the plot is. What I do know is that it's fantastic. I love the way it's written. The different characters' voices really colour just the narrative, and it's not told in first person, but it is sort of told from their perspective, and they're all just very unique. And the way that this book leaves off and sort of like sets up the rest of the series is just, it's so fantastic. It had me so hooked, and I can't believe I haven't carried on with the series yet, but yeah, this is just, again, I think this is another one that I gave like 4.5-ish stars to, and I loved it. Joe Abercrombie writes a fantastic grimdark, and I just can't wait to get further into this. Okay, 6th place, and this one kind of surprised me because I didn't think I would love it as much as I did going into it. So that is The Quick by Lauren Owen. So again, this is such a huge story with so many characters and so many POV characters that it's really hard to sort of like explain what the story is without getting into spoilers, because the story really sort of picks up like at the halfway point. I think the best way I can say it is that there is a brother and sister who are both from Yorkshire, which is like hometown rep, and the brother moves to London to become a poet, and after a while the sister stops receiving correspondence from him, and she ends up having to go to London to figure out what happened to her brother, why isn't he responding to her, like what's going on. The book is set in Victorian London, and it has vampires. It's a vampire story, it's a vampire book, and at the heart of it all there is this club called the Aegolius Club, which is essentially a club full of like rich men, a very exclusive like wealthy rich man's club that's sort of like shrouded in like mystery, and that is sort of at the heart of everything going on within this novel. So I thought this was fantastic, and it's definitely one that I'm going to reread time and again. It's so gothic but also Dickensian. The characters in this are like so unique, and all of them feel so like solid and real. You have so many different characters in this, and all of them have like really strange names, and it kind of feels a bit like a play where everyone's name sort of like has like this extra meaning to them. And the vampire aspect of this book was really, really good. I haven't seen it done in this way very much. It felt very unique but also very like classical vampire at the same time, while being kind of completely different. The book does have a like pretty diverse cast of like both genders. There are like women in this that are strong for different reasons, and there is like a male-male romance featured pretty prominently in this book. I think I definitely want to describe this as like literary fiction, but also sort of like this fantastical Dickensian feeling like gothic adventure story. So like it's really hard to place like what kind of genre this falls into. It is on some levels horror, like there's definitely like horror aspects because it's about vampires. The whole story is again really grounded in the characters, and I just fell in love with like this weird little alternative Victorian London that Lauren Owen crafted in this book, and just the way that things work and play out, and I just loved it. And if you're looking for like a kind of like dark vampire read but that has like a lot more to it than just like your standard gothic vampire novel, then I highly recommend picking this one up, especially around like winter time, because it has like such cold vibes to it, and I loved it, and I cannot recommend it enough. Take it from a true vampire fan, this is a fantastic book. Okay, we're at the halfway point, and so this is book number 5. and another one that I read recently and loved so much, and that is The Gutter Prayer by Gareth Hanrahan. This book was so my taste on so many levels. It is a city fantasy, so like the whole story is contained within this city, and it's so dark, it's so theological, and the scale of this book just keeps building the further and further you get into it. So the basic plot is that you're following these three thieves. One of them is a human girl, one of them is a ghoul that eats the flesh of the dead, and one of them is a stone man, which is a person who has contracted the stone plague and is slowly turning to stone. So already a really weird cast of characters, and I don't really want to spoil the plot because the back of the book doesn't actually go into like the plot of this story at all, so I think it's better if, like me, you just go in completely blind. But it does deal a lot with like dark gods and religion and magic and prophecy. The world crafted in this book is just so amazing. It just feels like, it almost feels like a really good like city to have like a D&D campaign in, because it's so unique, and like all the weird, almost like Lovecraftian kind of creatures that you get within this city. I don't want to spoil what they are. There is like alchemy and like weird magic and all sorts in this, and it's just so, it's such like a dark gritty fantasy, but like so based in like religion and like these dark twisted religions, and I love that so much. I'm such a sucker for fantasy that focuses on like the theological. So I don't really want to say much more than that because I don't really want to spoil it, but again, the characters in this are fantastic. The characters really carry this story. So much of it is told like directly from their perspectives, and every time we switched to a new person, a new perspective, I was just like so eager to see what they were doing, but also to get back to everyone else, because everyone's story just kind of went right from the start, and I loved it. Oh, those two look really similar next to each other. Okay, book number 4 on my list, and like just missing out on like my top 3 spot, is Blackwing by Ed McDonald. This book gave me grimdark at a time when I didn't even know that I really wanted that much grimdark. Like, this is like the grittiest, darkest, most miserable grimdark fantasy I have read to date, and I loved every second of that misery. The quote on the back of this book is, "Hope, reason, humanity, the misery destroys them all." And if that is not the truest thing. So this book follows a man named Rialt Galharrow as, initially right at the start, he is trekking out into this horrible place called the Misery, which is this like weird magical scar on the landscape, and it's filled with horrendous creatures. Time and space don't really work the same here. It's one of those places where once you go in, you're probably not going to come out. There are also these things in this book called the Deep Kings, which are sort of like these weird all-powerful beings who are trying to like destroy and take over humanity. And the only thing potentially keeping them at bay is this machine called Njaal's Engine. But at the start of this book, you learn that it might not exactly be working as intended. So I don't really want to say much more about this. I wasn't expecting just how dark and gritty this would be. I knew it was a fantasy, but I didn't know it was going to be like so post-apocalyptic feeling. I really loved this. At its heart, it is a mystery. So much of this book is spent in pursuit of like answers to big questions, and really following it along and like trying to work things out for yourself and like trying to get to that answer was so entertaining, and I flew through so much of this book. Like, the opening chapter had me so hooked. I think I just really loved how unique and interesting and just unforgiving this like environment was, like this world was. It is on like my top fantasy worlds of the year list. Yeah, I really love this one. I cannot recommend it enough, especially if you love anything grimdark. Like, this is the grimdarkiest of grimdarks that I have read to date. So yeah, highly recommend. Okay, so not to spoil anything for my top 3, but my top 3 are the only 3 5-star books I read this year, excluding rereads. And let me tell you, it was such a pain to try and order these. It's taken literal months for me to try and objectively decide what order these 3 books should go in my ranking. But these were undoubtedly like my 3 best books of the year, and I love them all so much. So okay, I'm just gonna get into it. So my number 3 spot, and the 3rd best book I read this year, and the one that destroyed me emotionally the most, I think out of any book I've ever read, is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This book is so beautiful and rich and vivid in its descriptions, and it's really beautiful writing. It has such beautiful prose, and at its heart it features like the sweetest, most like just like pure and heartfelt male-male relationship, and just this book is everything. So the basic plot of this book is that it is a retelling of the Trojan War and the years leading up to it. It follows Patroclus and Achilles as they grow up, and in this retelling they are lovers. I feel like most people kind of know what goes down in the Trojan War. It's just kind of, this somehow manages to feel very modern and very fresh while always kind of like harkening back to the sort of classic prose that I know. There were so many like little thematic elements or little phrases in this that just completely called back like my days of being in a classics classroom. Madeline Miller manages to create this sort of like nostalgia for like the classic Greek myths while just completely making it her own, and the writing in this is just really beautiful. It's not like over the top lyrical or poetic or anything like that, but it is just so lovely and pleasant to read. It's very descriptive, it's a little bit flowery, but then considering most of the classics are like full of like formulaic epithets and whatnot, I feel like this definitely really fits the theme here. So yeah, I love this one, and the events of this book really broke me. I went into this knowing exactly the sort of events that would take place within this book. I knew exactly what I was getting into, but still, this book had such an effect on me, and I was just in mourning over the fact that I'd finished this book, and every fibre of my being just wanted to read this book again and again and again, and I had like a sort of book hangover for a few days where I couldn't really will myself to pick anything up because this book just left me so emotionally unstable after finishing it. So yeah, I love this one. It was definitely a 5-star read. I cannot fault it at all, and I cannot wait to pick this up again and reread it. This I think is going to transition into like one of my yearly summer reads because I associate this so much with summertime now. And yeah, I loved it and I cannot recommend it enough, especially if you love any sort of like retelling, especially like Greek classics or anything like that. Please just do yourself a favour and pick this up. It's so good. Okay, these two are the ones that gave me so much trouble. But I finally decided, even though I love this book so much, what my second best book of the year is, and that is The Curse of Chalion by Lois McMaster Bujold. This book surprised me so much, and I am so glad that fate led me to pick this up because I have never heard a single other person on the planet ever mention or talk about this book. I have never seen any other booktuber or reviewer or anyone ever mention this series or this author, and the only reason I picked this up was because I was between jobs and I really wanted something to read, and so I managed to find this copy on like Amazon for I think it was like £1 or something, and I only bought this book because it was like the cheapest book I could find on Amazon. And let me tell you, if this isn't one of the best things I've ever read. So this book follows a man named Luc de Cazeral as he returns home from the war a little bit later than expected, because rather than returning home with the rest of his company, his command, he ended up being sold into slavery on a galley ship for several years, and he's only just managed to escape, and so now he's coming home sort of like a bit world weary and with a sort of broken body. And he's journeying back to the castle of his youth where he used to serve as a page, just sort of like looking for work, hoping that they'll take him in maybe as like a cook or something, just somewhere that he can like quietly live out the rest of his days after having like such an awful time of things after the war. But when he gets there, the old lady of the castle recognises him and remembers him from his youth, and so she ends up appointing him to be the secretary tutor to the sister to the heir of the throne. So this book has a lot of like political core intrigue and also this sort of like weird theological interdimensional demonic plotline, and so I love the world, I love the writing, I love that it just had like this super classical fantasy type setting. It's all like kingdoms and castles and feasts and balls and that sort of thing. Again, it was really the characters that made this for me. So like, not to spoil like my top favourite characters of the whole year list, however, the main character of this book, Cazeral, is literally my favourite character from any book ever. I adore him so much. His character was just so perfect to me and like so my taste. And honestly, if you just really like fantasy of any sort of type, I would really highly recommend picking this one up because I never hear anybody talking about it, and so it has become like my purpose in life to recommend this book every single chance I get, because I don't know a single other soul that has read this book. And like, it needs to change because it was so good. This was a 5-star read for me, and so like, if you take anything away from this video, it's that please, if you like fantasy, oh my god, try this book out. I just really liked it. It just warms my heart. I just really like this book. It was honestly so hard not to put this as like my #1 read for the whole year. I did really think about it. The only reason this isn't #1 is because the main thing that made this book for me was just this one character, and I think my #1 spot is more diverse in terms of I enjoyed like the writing and the story and like the setting and the plot more, but it was really close. Like, this is by far one of my favourite books of all time, and so not having it as #1 is kind of hurting, but also the book I have in first place I think does just deserve to be there just like a tiny bit more, if we're being like objective about it. And if you hadn't guessed yet, that book is Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. So this, again, when I read it, I gave 5 out of 5 stars. This story follows a girl called Mia. Her father was murdered and her family was betrayed when she was very young, and so since then she has been in training to enter this school called the Red Church so that she can become an assassin and get the skills that she needs to exact her revenge on the people who wronged her familiar. She also has these interesting powers to do with like control of shadows and the darkness, but the catch is she lives in a world where there are 3 suns and it is never nighttime. So this book was just the dark, bloody, kinda sexy, grimdark stabby fantasy of my dreams, and I just adored every second of this book. I loved the really witty writing style. Jay Kristoff writes in this sort of like fourth wall breaking way, and the book has footnotes, and I know a lot of people don't like them, but like I personally love that. The world in this book as well is again in my like top favourite fantasy world, so you can go and check out that video. But I just loved how like creative and unique this having 3 suns and no nighttime kind of like made this world. And I am, again, kind of a sucker for any sort of like magical school setting. So yeah, I really loved so many aspects of this book. There is a talking shadow cat in this book. If you haven't read Nevernight yet, honestly, what are you doing? A lot of people have said that like this book is really hard to get through, like the first 100 pages, but then it picks up from there. I didn't find that at all. I didn't find myself bored at all in the first 100 pages. I thought it was fine. I guess it depends like what you're used to. But all I can say is like this book and the climactic sort of like way that it delivers all of its like gut-punching plot points is just so good. This book took me by surprise twice, which almost never happens in books. I can predict almost everything that's going to happen in a book, any sort of plot twist, anything, and this book managed to get 2 tiny plot twists over on me, and it was just so refreshing just to be like shocked and caught off guard by like a twist in a book, like for once, and I was just so glad that like there are still books that can do that to me. And so yeah, just because of how much I loved the writing, how much I loved the characters, the plot, the event, the story, the location, the world building, everything about this had to be my number 1, 5 out of 5 stars, best book of 2019. So much of this year has been like the year of Nevernight for me. I read all the books in this series this year. I went to meet Jay Kristoff. I got all of them signed and personalised, and Pierre Ford came out with her like amazing adaptation, and I got one of my close friends into Nevernight and made her binge the whole series, and like this year has just been so Nevernight themed for me. I'm literally wearing a perfume right now called the Crow Swagger, based on Mia. So like yeah, if it was going to be any book, it had to be Nevernight. So there you go, those are my top 10 favourite books of the year. These were like the best things that I read this year, and I've discovered so many like new authors and like new series that are so now near and dear to me that I'm just so pleased with my year of reading and the choices that I made this year in like what to pick up, because these have been so fantastic and so worth any of the other mediocre books I read this year. So this is the last like wrap up of 2019 style video you're gonna get from me. Obviously I saved the literal best for last. Do let me know in the comments like what was your favourite read of the year, like your number 1 pick, because like I can use all the recommendations I can get. And other than that, yeah, I think that's it for this video. I hope you're all having a wonderful end to 2019 or a great start to 2020, depending on when this comes out. So remember to keep reading, stay magic, and I will see you guys hopefully in the next video. Bye!